All right, everyone, we're going to talk about diminished chord scales today. Now, we talked about diminished chords last time, passing diminished, above and below, and auxiliary diminished. So you should, at this point, sort of know, like, what the functional diminished chords are, and hopefully even have something from your repertoire that's an example of one. At this point, probably now, what's a lot harder to do, and the harder part of diminished chords, I think, is figuring out what the diminished chord scale is for each appropriate diminished chord that comes up. Now, I want to preface this little lecture by saying I'm sure you read the book already, and every time people read the chapter of the book, people do have questions because there's a lot of information there, and I hope you took careful notes on it, and I hope you took it to heart. What I'm about to describe to you is a little bit of a shortcut. I want to say that the information in the book is more accurate. What I'm doing right now, I almost feel guilty putting it on a video because like it's a little bit of a janky explanation, but it's something that's worked for me every single time, especially when I'm in a jam and I don't have a lot of time. So I just want to preface it with that. I like the accurate. I don't want to say what I'm going to say is not accurate, but well, you'll wait and see. You'll know what I mean in a minute. First thing you got to remember is that remember a chord scale is a guide for chord voicings. Okay, so a lot of people are like, well, what about the like the half whole diminished scale and stuff like that? That is a cool workaround. Like if you do want to just play a scale and play patterns and make diminished patterns when you're improvising, that certainly could work over these things. But I mean, in this particular case, what we're looking for is a what notes you can add to the diminished seventh chord that won't change the function of the chord. It's a guide, which tensions are available, which ones are not. So remember, we're coming up with a guide for chord voicings, meaning all of them, like sharp 1 diminished is different than sharp 2 diminished and all of that. I don't have each diminished chord Roman numeral memorized the same way that I have, like, okay, 1 major 7 is Ionian, 2 is Dorian, avoid 6, 3 is Phrygian, secondary dominants approaching minor chords, or mixo flat 9 sharp 9, all that stuff, you know, like all those shortcuts that we talked about. I don't have those for each individual diminished scale. I just have a system that I use to come up with it. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to do an example of this progression right here. Just it's B flat. You're in the key of B flat. You're going to go B flat major, B diminished, and C major 7. So something that sounds like that might eventually go back to F or something like that. So that's what we're going to use as an example, and we're going to find the chord scale for B diminished 7. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to go down here and show you what the steps are. Step 1 is going to be to fill in the chord tones, right? So let's just actually do step 1. I already did it. If it's a B diminished 7 chord, then you're going to fill in the notes in a B diminished 7 chord. And it's actually really easy to do that because you have if B is a root note, you're just going up in minor thirds from B. So first of all, and the other thing is, what's the Roman numeral for that? It's sharp 1 diminished 7. So with every chord scale comes a Roman numeral, so you got to add that. By the way, if you have a piece of manuscript paper in front of you, follow along with me and do this. It will make it easier to have it stick in your mind. So you're going to have a 1, a flat 3, a flat 5, and you could call this double flat 7 if you want, or 6, you know. Whatever you want to do. I mean, honestly, I'm not too concerned when I'm doing diminished chord scales about what I call the notes. I just, because no matter what with diminished chords, accidentals are going to get a little bit squirrely. So as long as you know which pitches you can use and which pitches you shouldn't use, what you call them, I'm a little bit looser about. And I'll explain that more in a second. Now, step 2. Keep in mind, if you're looking at think about the two notes you have here, B and D, right? Play B and D on a keyboard, or picture a keyboard in your mind. B and D. How many notes are between B and D? There's 2, right? In between every minor third, there's going to be 2 notes. So that means between D and F, there's 2 notes. Between F and A flat, there's 2 notes. Between A flat and B again, because what's up a minor third from A flat? C flat, which is the same as B. So between A flat and B, there's 2 notes. So a diminished scale, and this is also really important. A diminished scale is an 8-note scale. 8-note scale. Kind of like Mixolydian, flat 9, sharp 9, flat 13, it's not going to be a 7-pitch scale. You're going to have, there's going to be a note that comes after every single chord tone. After every single chord tone. And to determine which one that is, you're going to use step 2. Write the diatonic note that's between the two notes. So like between B, you're in the key of B flat. Between B and D, there's a C and there's a D flat. Which one is diatonic to the key of B flat, to the original key? It's C. So let's fill in a C. Now you don't have to do them in red. I'm just doing that for example's sake. But we're going to determine the avoid tones later. But D, you have E flat and E natural between F. Which one fits, E flat or E? Well, E flat in a B flat scale. There's no E natural in a B flat scale. Now you have F. F, you have F sharp and G. Well, G. Now you have A flat. So you're going to have a note after A flat, which I know is weird. It's like after note 7, but because to make an 8-note scale, you have to have one pitch after every one of those notes. So remember that as a rule. After A flat, you have A, which is diatonic to the key, and then B flat, which is also diatonic to the key. Uh-oh, there's 2 notes that are diatonic to the key. So here's optional step 3. If there are 2, there's step 3, sorry. If there are 2 diatonic notes, write the one that's closer to the original key. Okay, this is where my explanation gets a little bit janky, but it really does help me out. I'm saying which of the 2 notes is closer to the key of B flat. It's like, well, Mark, they're both diatonic to the key of B flat. I know, but let's just think about it, like, just for a second. If you're in B flat major, what note fits B flat better? B flat, the 1, or A, 7, the leading tone? I mean, to me, B flat, if you're going to play a B flat major chord, what's most inside that chord? Whoops, not that. The note B flat as opposed to A. That if that kind of is the leading tone, that could be I mean, it sounds fine. I'm not saying that like A is not a good note to use on a B flat major chord. It's like, yeah, that makes it a B flat major 7. It's pretty great. I'm just saying technically which one is closer to the key. 1 is the closest to the key you possibly could get. So as long as you can accept that, then you can just write a B flat here, and this is our diminished chord scale. The only thing we need to do now is do the same thing we've been doing all along to try and determine which notes are avoid tones and which notes are not. So we're going to play the whole step or half step game. Between B and C, that's a half step, right? So C becomes an avoid tone. D and E flat, half step. E flat becomes an avoid tone. F and G, well, that's a whole step, so that becomes an available tension, the G. A flat to, in the key signature, B flat, that's a whole step. So that becomes an available tension. That's your chord scale. Now notice what I didn't do. I didn't call this tension flat 13. I didn't call this tension 14. I just left it as an available tension. And pretty much because of this note is why we do that. It's like, do you really want to call like tension 14 feels a little weird to say. B diminished 7 add a 14. It's like kind of a funny thing to offer, but like in a lot of ways, if you go back to songs like Spring is Here, right? Like that's not a sharp 1 diminished 7 chord. But if you think back to Spring is Here, where you have an A flat diminished 7, you play the A flat diminished, that doesn't sound too bad. Especially if you end up resolving it. If you change that note to G flat, right, that's an A flat diminished chord with a G flat in a void tone. This is with a G. Sounds a lot more normal. You know, very pretty actually in that particular case. So 7 is a note that's like a good melody note to use if you have a diminished chord. I'll also say that to be honest, right? I don't add a lot of tensions to diminished chords. It doesn't really come up that much. I look at the diminished chord scale as like, yeah, sure, you could, and people do. Like, it is something you can do. It's a voicing choice you can definitely make, and people have had a lot of success with it. But more often than not, if I'm going to use a diminished chord, I might add one of the available tensions to my melody, and it might be kind of a cool opportunity to use a diminished chord if you have an available tension in the melody. But I don't go out of my way to add tensions to the voicings on diminished chord. If I want the diminished chord, I want all those tritones, you know. Think of B diminished. You have a B on a B diminished triad. You have a B and an F if you skip the D. And you have a D and an A flat. If I start adding tensions to that chord, I don't really hear those strong tritones as much. And like, I don't know if I want that color. I just want to go all in with it. I don't want it to be an in-between color. I'm either not going to use a diminished chord at all, or I'm going to want all of that dissonance. You know, those two tritones together. So yeah. So that's. I'm going to do another example in a second, but that's one example of how you'd find a chord scale of a sharp 1 diminished 7 chord. For all of the other diminished 7 chords, like I'm going to do one of this is a passing diminished chord from below. I'm about to do one of a passing diminished chord from above. But the process is the same for auxiliary diminished, for passing diminished, like all of it. Like you'd still fill in the chord tones. You'd still write the diatonic note that's between the chord tones. And then if there's 2 diatonic notes, you'll write the one closer to the key. I'll also say this, that the one closer to the key, while that's a little bit of a janky explanation, you're either going to be, at all times, you're either going to be determining between 3 and 4, and in the key of B flat, what's closer to the key of B flat? D natural, like which totally fits the chord, or E flat, which is a straight up avoid tone. I mean, obviously 3 is, right? And so you're either going to be deciding between 3 and 4 or 1 and 7. And 1 is like as close to the key you can get. So as long as you can kind of accept those, to me that's really easy to accept. Sometimes it like really bugs people out. It's like, oh my God, but they're both diatonic, Mark. Which one's closer? What are you talking about? I don't know. To me, and if you just can't figure that out, then the only other alternative is to memorize all the diminished chord scales. Which you can do, honestly, like great, whatever. For me, simple guy. I just want one rule to remember everything, and I just write out the notes, and then I look to the diatonic note, and if I ever have multiple options, I just pick the one closer. So I hope that makes sense. We'll do some examples in class, and I'll do another video with just one more example.